underscored the word bear. And it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. A bear is much more treacherous and unpredictable than a lion. Bears can be they have poor eyesight for one thing. They have very good hearing. But they are unpredictable, and if you cross one and get near it, just with one swat of one of their paws, especially grizzlies, they can just break you in half. They can kill you instantaneously. So the nature of the Medo-Persian Empire was like the nature of the animal in creation, the bear. And if you look again into archaeology and all of that, you will see, connected with the Medo-Persian Empire, bears. In fact, they trained bears, and they entertained with bears, and they kept them on leashes. You'll see a lot of that within the history and the confines of the architecture of the Medo-Persian Empire, exactly as the Bible said. So that was the nature of the Medo-Persian Empire. Some people have taught, and it's false, that the bear is Russia. It's not Russia. God didn't recognize Russia. He recognized Medo-Persia, plus Russia did not immediately follow the Babylon Empire. Medo-Persia did. Case closed. Now, let's go to verse 6. In other words, when you once get this under your fingernail, so to speak, you don't get carried away with every wind of doctrine that comes along. And that's my motive. I want you to know what you're talking about, because nothing, with the exception of a fire whistle or a bell to stop work, stops the conversation as quickly as someone who actually knows what they're talking about. You can stop them cold. Verse 6, After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, underscore leopard. The nature of the Grecian Empire, the nature was like the beast of a leopard. Leopards are absolutely, they're ferocious, and they are swift and destructive. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings. In other words, it didn't just have the nature of a leopard, it had wings with speed. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. The nature of the Grecian Empire was just like a leopard. Alexander the Great, and we'll get there in just a moment or two, absolutely, with such exactness, he executed with such speed and destruction. He conquered everything very quickly, just like a leopard. That was the nature of the Grecian Empire. And then, verse 7. So at this point, we're studying about Babylon, Medo-Persia, the Grecian Empire, and then the Roman Empire. So, in the vision, in the dream, there was an animal in creation, the lion, the bear, the leopard, that he could liken the nature of these empires to. But when it came to this 4th empire, look at verse 7. There was no animal in creation that God had created whose nature was as destructive, as terrifying as this last nature of this last empire. And this I saw in the night vision 7, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible. That's the only explanation he had for it. It wasn't like the lion standing on its feet. It wasn't like the bear. It wasn't like the leopard. It was just a dreadful and terrible, terrible creature, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces. See, there's the word iron. The Roman Empire was represented by the metal iron. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. It was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I want you to underscore 10 horns, and in parentheses, after 10 horns, write in there, nations. This is a major anchor in this whole lesson, Daniel's 70th week. Major. It represents the Roman Empire. Wherever you see the 10 horns, it represents the 10 nations or the old Roman Empire. Daniel goes on and says, in verse 8, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn. Underscore little horn, and write in there 666. That's the Antichrist. Out of that 4th Gentile empire, The Roman Empire was never totally destroyed. Everything else was. The Babylonian Empire was destroyed, its culture, its language, the Medes and the Persians. The Greeks have retained the language, but everything else is gone. But our whole system of government is based upon the democracy-type plan of the Roman Empire. And that Roman Empire is beginning to rise again, even in our day. And I can talk to you a lot about that. But here, they came up out of that fourth Gentile empire, a little horn, 666, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. In other words, when the Antichrist comes on the scene after the rapture, as we've been discussing, that Antichrist will get control of 3 of those old Roman Empire nations around the Mediterranean Sea. That will give him his political power to establish and negotiate politically with the world at that time. That's where he'll get it. He'll get control of those three of those old Roman Empire nations around the Mediterranean Sea. It says here, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots, and behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. So, go from there now to chapter 8. Here, vision number 3, this has to do with the military might of these empires. First, we discussed the political power, then the nature, and now we're going to discuss the military might of these nations. However, in this particular vision, dream, the only 2 nations that are mentioned are Media, Persia, and Greece. So if we get into verse 1, this is the most fascinating chapter to me in this whole study. It's absolutely incredible that this information was written, prophesied, before these nations came into power and exacted all these things that God decreed would come to pass in the world among men. So here in verse 1, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan. Shushan was the summer palace of the kings. That's what Shushan was, and Daniel was there. And in this palace, he had this dream, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Eula. Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram. It's very important that you get all this stuff written down that I'm saying. Underscore the word ram. There stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. At the end of verse 3, right in there, verse 20, here the Bible explains exactly what that ram is. So if you go over to verse 20, here, the ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia. It's fascinating. Verse 4, and I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. Right in there, 200 years. The Media-Persian Empire lasted 200 years. And so Daniel is continuing in verse 5, and as I was considering, behold, an he-goat. Put a circle around he-goat or underscore it. An he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth and touched not the ground. And the goat had a notable horn. Underscore notable horn. Draw an arrow to the margin and write in there, Alexander the Great. And to prove that, go back and look at verse 21. Because here is the interpretation of the dream. And the rough goat is the king of Grisha. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. And the first king of Greece was Alexander the Great. So at the end of verse 5, write verse 21. So you can always just find these things very quickly in your Bible. Verse 6, and he, this notable horn, Alexander the Great, this he-goat, came to the ram which was Media-Persia, that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close upon the ram, and he was moved with choler. Underscore the word choler, that means hatred. It was hatred in Alexander the Great's fury against this reigning kingdom. And it says, and smote the ram, and brake his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Verse 8. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken. It's the death of Alexander the Great. If you go back to verse 22, I'll read 21 again. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now, verse 22, now that being broken, it was his death. Whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. When Alexander the Great died, there were 4 generals, and the whole Grecian Empire was divided between those 4 generals. And so those nations were Macedonia, Syria, Thrace, and Egypt. Before this ever happened, this was prophesied. And you can see it here. That's why I have put here Alexander the Great, and then of course the 4 generals. The kingdom was divided between them, Macedonia, Thrace, Syria, and Egypt. And this kingdom lasted 178 years, the Grecian Empire. Going back now to verse 23. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding, dark sentences shall stand up. This is the Antiochus Epiphanes. He's that little horn that came out of all of that. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own might. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. That's the Jews in Palestine. So you can underscore holy people and write Jews in Palestine. Because if you go back to verse 9, it says, out of one of them came a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, etc. That little horn was Antiochus Epiphanes. In fact, the Jews actually thought he was the Antichrist. He actually offered a pig on the altar in the temple in Jerusalem. So you can see what that would do to Judaism and their understanding of the Mosaic law and the keeping of the laws of Moses. Here in verse 25, and through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, he shall magnify himself, etc. And then toward the end it says, he shall also stand up against the prince of princes. And that has to do with the Lord in 160 BC. But he shall be broken without hand. So near the prince of princes in verse 25, underscore that and write the Lord in 160 BC. So in 160 BC, the Roman Empire came into existence. I think it's interesting, verse 26, and the vision of the evening and the morning which was told is true. Wherefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. Look at verse 27. And I, Daniel, fainted. He collapsed because of the emotion in being exposed to such revelatory, insightful, spiritual things. If you really walk in the Spirit, and you negotiate the spirit world, it's exhausting. It really is exhausting. And you have to be there before you can understand that. There is tremendous virtue that goes out of you when you minister and preach and walk in this.